Cyme was an Aeolian city in Aeolis close to the Kingdom of Lydia. The Aeolians regarded Cyme as the largest and most important of their 12 cities, which were located on the coastline of Asia Minor. As a result of their direct access to the sea, unlike most non-landlocked settlements of the ancient world, trade is believed to have prospered. Location. Both the author of the Life of Homer and Strabo, the ancient geographer, locate Cyme north of the Hermus River on the Asia Minor coastline. Modern-day Nemrut Limani. After crossing the Hilus, the distance from Larissa to Cyme was 70 stadia, and from Cyme to Myrina was 40 stadia. Archaeological finds such as coins give reference also to a river, believed to be that of the Hilus. History. Early history. Little is known about the foundation of the city to supplement the traditional founding legend. Settlers from mainland Greece migrated across the Aegean Sea during the Late Bronze Age as waves of Dorian-speaking invaders brought an end to the once mighty Mycenaean civilization sometime around 1050 BC. During the Late Bronze Age and early Greek Dark Ages, the dialect of Cyme and the surrounding region of Aeolis, like that of neighboring island Lesbos, closely resembled the local dialect of Thessalia and Boeotia in continental Greece. The colony was founded during the Greek Dark Ages by settlers from Locris in central Greece who began by reducing the Pelasgian citadel of Larissa, near the river Hermus. Cyme developed into a regional metropolis to some 30 other towns and settlements in Aeolis. The Cymians were later ridiculed as a people who had for 300 years lived on the coast and not once exacted harbour taxes on ships making port. Hesiod's father is said to have started his journey across the Aegean from Cyme. The cities of southern Aeolis in the region surrounding Cyme occupied a good belt of land with rough mountains in the background. Yet Cyme, like other colonies along the coast, did not trade with the native Anatolians further inland, who had occupied Asia Minor for thousands of years. Cyme consequently played no significant role in the history of Western Asia Minor, prompting the historian Ephorus, himself a native of the city, to comment repeatedly in his narrative of Greek history that while the events he wrote about were taking place, his fellow Cymians had for centuries sat idly by and kept the peace. Politically, Cyme is assumed to have started as a settler democracy following in the tradition of other established colonies in the region, although Aristotle concluded that by the 7th and 6th centuries BC the once great democracies in the Greek world evolved not from democracies to oligarchies as was the natural custom, but from democracies to tyrannies. 5th century BC. By the 5th century BC, Cyme was one of the 12 established Ionian colonies in Aeolis. Herodotus mentions that one of the esteemed voters deciding whether or not to support militiades the Athenian in his plan to liberate the Ionian coast from Persian rule in was Aristagoras of Cyme. Aristagoras campaigned on the side of Hysterius the Milesian with the tyrants Stratus of Chios, Eoses of Samos and Laodamas of Phasia in opposing such an initiative, arguing instead that each tyrant along the Ionian coast owed their position to Darius, king of Persia, and that liberating their own cities would encourage democracy over tyranny. Cyme eventually came under the control of the Persian Empire following the collapse of the Lydian kingdom at the hands of Cyrus the Great. When Pactes, the Lydian general, sought refuge in Cyme from the Persians, the citizens were between a rock and a hard place. As Herodotus records, they consulted the Greek god Apollo, who said after much confusion through an oracle that he should be handed over. However, a native of Cyme questioned Apollo's word and went back to the oracle himself to confirm if indeed Apollo wanted the Cymians to surrender. Pactes, not wanting to come to grief over the surrender of Pactes, nor wanting the ill effects of a Persian siege, they avoided dealing with the Persians by simply sending him off to Mytilene on the island of Lesbos. not far from their city. In his histories, Herodotus makes reference to Cyme as being one of the cities in which the rebel Lydian governor Pactyes sought refuge, following his attempted rebellion against the Persian king Cyrus the Great. c. 546 BC. Pactyes, when he learnt that an army was already on his tracks and near, took fright and fled to Cyme, and Mezes the Mede marched to Sardis with a detachment of Cyrus troops. Finding Pactyes and his supporters gone, the first thing he did was to compel the Lydians to carry out Cyrus' orders, as a result of which they altered from that moment their whole way of life. He then sent a demand to Cyme that Pactyes should be surrendered, and the men of the town decided to consult the oracle at Branchidai as to whether they should obey. The messengers returned home to report, and the citizens of Cyme were prepared in consequence to give up the wanted man. After the Persian naval defeat at Salamis, Xerxes moored the surviving ships at Cyme. Before 480 BC, Cyme had been the principal naval base for the royal fleet. Later accounts of Cyme's involvement in the Ionian revolt, which triggered the Persian Wars, confirm their allegiance to the Ionian Greek cause. During this time, Herodotus states that due to the size of the Persian army, Darius the Great was able to launch a devastating three-pronged attack on the Ionian cities. The third army, which he sent north to take Sardis, was under the command of his son-in-law Otanus, who promptly captured Cyme and Clazomenare in the process. However, later accounts reveal how Sandoses, the supposed Ionian governor of Cyme, helped draft a fleet of 15 ships for Xerxes' the first great expedition against mainland Greece c. 480 BC. Cyme is also believed to have been the port in which the Persian survivors of the Battle of Salamis wintered, and lends considerable weight to the argument that Cyme was not only well served by defensive walls, but enjoyed the benefits of a large port capable of wintering and supplying a large wartime fleet. As a result, Cyme, like most Ionian cities at the time, was a maritime power and a valuable asset to the Persian Empire. Once Aristagoras of Miletus roused the Ionians to rebel against Darius, Cyme joined the insurrection. However, the revolts at Cyme were quelled once the city was recovered by the Persians. Sandoses, the governor of Cyme at the time of Xerxes, commanded 15 ships in the Persian military expedition against Greece. Herodotus believes that Sandoses may have been a Greek. After the Battle of Salamis, the remnants of Xerxes' fleet wintered at Cyme. Thucydides does not provide any significant mention of place, is hardly more than mentioned in the history of Thucydides. Roman and Byzantine-era Polybius records that Cyme obtained freedom from taxation following the defeat of Antiochus III, later being incorporated into Roman Asia province. During the reign of Tiberius, the city suffered from a great earthquake common in the Aegean. Other Roman sources such as Pliny the Elder mention Cyme as one of the cities of Aeolia, which supports Herodotus' similar claim. The above-mentioned, then, are the 12 towns of the Ionians. The Aeolic cities are the following: Cyme, called also Phryconise, Larissa, Neontychus, Temnus, Scylla, Notium, Agyroessa, Pitane, Aegea, Myrina, and Granea. These are the 11 ancient cities of the Aeolians. Originally, indeed, they had 12 cities upon the mainland, like the Ionians, but the Ionians deprived them of Smyrna, one of the number. The soil of Aeolis is better than that of Ionia, but the climate is less agreeable. It was assigned to the Roman province of Asia Prima. Ecclesiastical History. During the Eastern Roman Empire, Cyme became a bishopric, which was a suffragan of the Metropolitan of Ephesus. Titula See. The diocese was nominally restored in 1894 as a Latin titula See. It is vacant, having had the following incumbents, all of the lowest rank: Carlo Quironi, Orazio Mazzella, Jenna Kranitz, Peter Leo Ireton, James Donald Scanlon, Urbane Marie Persson, Capuchin Friars. Archaeology. Archaeologists first started taking an interest in the site in the middle of the 19th century, as the wealthy landowner D. Baltazzi and later S. Rianache began excavation on the southern necropolis. In 1925, Salic, working out of the Bohemian mission, uncovered many interesting finds, including a small temple to Isis, a Roman porticus and what is believed to be a potter's house. Encouraged by their successes, Turkish archaeologist E. Akugul began his own project in 1955 which uncovered an orientalizing ceramic on the southern hill. Between 1979 to 1984, the Izmir Museum carried out similar excavations at various locations around the site, uncovering further inscriptions and structures on the southern hill. Geophysical studies at Cyme in more recent years have given archaeologists a much greater knowledge of the site without being as intrusive. Geomagnetic surveys of the terrain reveal additional structures beneath the soil, as yet untouched by excavations. The northwest side of the southern hill was utilized as a residential neighborhood during the entire existence of the city. Only a limited area of the hill has been investigated. It has been verified that there were at least 5 successive phases of building. 1. A long and straight wall going from north to southeast represented the most ancient building phase. In the wall there are visible traces of a threshold linking 2 rooms. There is uncertainty as to the chronology of the wall, but what is sure is that it was built before the end of the 5th century BC. 2 rooms, that were part of a building dating back to the end of the 5th century BC, belong to the second phase. The building appears to be complete on the northern side, but could have also had other rooms on the southern side, where the entrance to room A opened up. The western wall of room A was constructed with squared limestone blocks, and also acted as a terracing wall connecting the strong natural difference on the side of the hill. At the foot of this wall there was a cistern excavated in the rock that gathered water coming from the roof of the house. The cistern was filled with debris and great amounts of black and plain pottery dating back to the late Hellenistic age. 3. Some walls that belonged to the Imperial Roman period were constructed by means of white mortar and bricks. During this phase a service room east of room A, with a floor that was made of leveled rock, was built. In the area of the cistern, by now filled, a new room decorated by wall paintings was also built. 4. A large house occupied the area during the late Roman period. The rooms were constructed using reused materials, but without the use of mortar, and often enriched by polychrome mosaics. Access was gained by a ramp, placed at the edge of the southwestern part of the excavation. Still, what needs to be clarified is the extent of the building, whose destruction is placed between the end of the 6th century to the beginning of the 7th century AD. 5. The final phase is represented by some superficial structures found at the northern part of the excavation. There is a long wall going from the northwest to the southeast and a ramp built with reused blocks, with the same orientation as the wall. The wall and the ramp could be proof that this area was utilized during the Byzantine Age. Numismatics archaeological coinage exists from the Roman imperial era, from Nero to Gallienus. The river god Hermes, horse with their forefoot raised and victorious athletes are typical symbols commonly found on period coinage minted at Cyme. Trivia. Cyme was the birthplace of the historian Ephorus. Hesiod's father, according to the poet, sailed from Cyme to settle at Ascra in Boeotia, which does not prove. As such, compilers as Stephanus and Suidas suppose that Hesiod was a native of Cyme.